Okay. Is this on? Okay. Hey, I want to thank everybody for coming. The men were able to have a little fellowship downstairs before this, but I'm excited to have two of my good friends here tonight and share their message with you. We have Dr. Alex Kor here, and we also have Graham Honecker. They're two of my good friends. Our ties go back to Butler University, but I got to be fortunate enough to meet Dr. Kor's mother, Eva, a few years ago, and it kind of changed my life hearing her message. And Dr. Kor, I'm going to first introduce, bring up Graham Honecker first, but Dr. Kor has taken his mother's legacy up and across this country and all. So first I want to introduce Graham Honecker.
Well, good evening. It's really great to be with you. Honored to be here, and especially want to thank Brent and the Sandman family. They've been so supportive of our work. This is the second time we've been down in Shelbyville. Actually, I think the first lecture we did on this book, which came out last May, was over at Brent and Jan's home. And I know how much they do in this community. They also do so much for us at Butler. Also want to recognize the Sherwood family who's here with us tonight. Bill and Dana, thank you for all that you do. I'm not going to talk that long. This is really an amazing story about Alex Kor and his parents. But as the co-author of the book, I really want to set the stage for how this project came to be and just talk about a couple of my motivations for the project. When we published the book, which is now in its fourth printing, we've had a great response in the number of books sold. I'm really grateful. My mom has bought so many of these to make sure that it did well. But when the book came out, we got all kinds of speaking requests, and we've been all over the country together. This past year, we even went to Europe. The title of the book is A Blessing, Not a Burden, and after Alex and I have spent so much time together this past year, he's going to be writing another book on me, which is entitled A Burden, Not a Blessing. But in all seriousness, when we talked about how these presentations were going to work, I said, I'm fine sitting out in the audience. Again, this is your story. And he said, no, it's important that you're up here with me. And the main reason is because I'm not Jewish. I'm Episcopalian, lifelong Christian Episcopalian. And he said, it's so important for us to be up here talking from a multi-faith platform. And I hope if you get anything out of our presentation tonight, it's striving for unity in a world that seems really divided right now. And what are the messages that we can learn from Alex and his family? To briefly set up the story again, Alex and I met through my work at Butler University. So I'm a fundraiser. I've been there 13 years. Bill and Dana, Sam family, I'm not going to ask you for any money tonight, I promise you. Maybe tomorrow, but not tonight. When I first arrived at Butler, I didn't know anyone. They give you a big list of people, and they said, go out, find these people, charm them, and we take cash, check, or credit. Go out and raise some money for Butler. And when I got this list of names, I saw Dr. Alex Kor, Baltimore, Maryland. Again, I'm not an Indiana native, and so I really didn't know this amazing story about the Kors and his family. And I always take a lot of pride in trying to research a donor, a prospective donor that I go out to visit with. And in my research, it was incredible. I started reading about Eva Kor, this diminutive woman who was a Mengele twin, survived Auschwitz, and went on to forgive the Nazis. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to meet her son, and how am I going to do all this? And Alex and I met in Baltimore, Maryland in 2014. He always picks the most expensive restaurant and has never paid the bill. And in that evening, I just became mesmerized by this whole story. He talked about his mom. We talked about the Holocaust. And what I learned that night, which I didn't know, is that his dad had also survived the Holocaust. His dad had actually survived multiple camps. So we really connected well. We developed a rapport. Alex never wrote me that check, and 11 years later, I'm still waiting. But he told me something at the end of our dinner that night. He said, you know, my mom has spoken all over the world, and his mom at that time was 79 years old and was still speaking more than 100 times per year on forgiveness and her experiences. And Alex said, you know, she's never spoken at Butler. And I said, how is that possible? And I went back, and I was on a mission. I'm like, we've got to get her to come speak at Butler. And I went to our president, and to his credit, about 2 weeks later, he sent me an email, and he said, Eva Kor is going to be our commencement speaker this year, and we're going to give her an honorary degree. Now, I'll never forget when she spoke in Hinkle Fieldhouse in 2015, and I encourage you, if you're looking for some motivation, you can go to YouTube and put in Eva Kor Commencement, Butler University. Hinkle Fieldhouse, we had 9,200 people there that day. And here's Eva Kor coming up. She's getting her degree, and she's speaking to our graduates. And she looked 1,000 of our graduates in the eye, and she told her story. But what really stuck out to me was when she said, when you go home tonight, I want you to look your parents in the eye, and I want you to give them a hug. Not just because they paid a lot of money for you to come to Butler, but because when I graduated from Auschwitz, when the camp was liberated, I was looking around for my parents to give them a hug, and they weren't there. Her parents had been murdered right when she got to Auschwitz. And she then motioned for her son, Alex, who was sitting in the front row. She goes, I would now like for my son, Alex, to come up, and I'd like to give him a hug. And I still give goosebumps telling that story. And from that day on, Alex and I, our friendship really blossomed, but it blossomed not just around things we had in common and basketball, but really about how could we continue to extend his parents' messages. We created a scholarship in his mother's name at Butler. We worked to create one in his father's name at Purdue. We worked on a documentary with our good friend Ted Green, which came out in 2018. And you go back about 2 years ago, Alex and I were sitting at dinner, and he said, you know, I still have this goal of writing a book about my story and my parents. And I kind of got mad at him. I said, you know, you've been talking about this since I met you that night in Baltimore. You either need to write the book or you need to quit talking about it. And that next day, I developed about 20 questions about his life, and then the book we started progressing from there, and it took us about 6 or 7 months to write. And we were really motivated. This was in August of 2023 when it started. A couple months later was October 7th. When Hamas attacked Israel, and we really need to get this book out. Before I turn it over to Alex, I just want to share a couple of my motivations, again, as a person who has many Jewish friends, but is not Jewish, is Christian, why I was inspired to work on this project. The first of which is just the continued hatred and bigotry and racism and political strife that we see in this world. We saw it this past weekend, tragically, with the events in Minnesota. And I said, in my own way, can we do something that presents a unified message that tells his family story? Again, 80 years after his parents were liberated, we still have so much work to do. Carmel, Indiana, last year, their anti-Semitic literature, spread across neighborhoods. If we were to drive about an hour and a half to the southwest, we'd be in Paoli. One of the largest Holocaust deniers in this country lives there. We still have so many problems with anti-Semitism and hatred, and I was motivated from my standpoint to do something there. I have, second motivation, I have 2 really young daughters who are at away camp right now. So if I look well-rested, I'm an empty nester, and I got to tell you, it's great. But if you look at the statistics, the survey of how little this younger generation knows about the Holocaust, it's terrifying. So we wanted to write a book that hopefully I can pass down to my children and their children, but it's so important that we continue to tell these stories. I also wanted to tell Alex a story. The world knows about his mother's story, and a lot of Hoosiers know about his dad's story. Alex is not just a good friend, but he's a hero to me as well. And I think when he tells his story, he'll tell you about what he's been through, which is in its own right an amazing accomplishment, the adversity that he's faced and that he's overcome. 2 last reasons. This powerful message of forgiveness. You know, none of us can really comprehend what it was like being in a concentration camp, but I think we're all have somebody in our lives, or we've had somebody in our lives that we're trying to forgive. His mother really helped me forgive a very close family member of mine, and I thought, you know, again, in this world we're living in, forgiveness is something that we all need to consider and need to keep in mind with our relationships. And then finally, a good friend of ours who's Jewish, a mutual friend of ours, about 1.5 years ago, we were at lunch, and he looked at me and goes, "Why are you involved in these projects? You know, you're not Jewish." And I hadn't really thought about it because Alex and I are such close friends, and I thought projects like this where you're trying to, I think, combat hatred and anti-Semitism and racism, we all should take a part in. But later that night I thought about it. I do have a tie back to this time. My father-in-law, who's no longer with us, actually was born and raised in Nazi Germany. He was born in Munich in 1932, and he was forced to become a Hitler Youth. You had to do that if you were a young boy. And after the war, his family wanted out of Germany. They moved here, and he became a great businessman in Chicago and, again, tried to fight prejudice. My point in saying that is we all have some type of tie to the past, both good and bad, and what are we trying to do in the present to make sure our future's better. So it's really been an honor for me to work with Alex on this project, and I'm going to turn it over to him for the real part of the story.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank Brent and his family, and thank your entire church for inviting us here. This is the second time I think I've been in Shelbyville. You know, when I was at Butler, we had like a pipeline from Shelbyville. Mark Kraft, Scott Olinger, Mike Blackburn, these are all people I knew when I was in college. So over the next 30 or 40 minutes, I'm going to tell you a story about my dad, my mom, and my story, and then hopefully we can open it up for questions. You know, some of you hopefully will be inspired. Some of you hopefully will be motivated. Some of you may cry. I usually cry at some point. But don't be surprised when I tell you my story that some of you may laugh. My parents, despite the subject matter, my parents had this incredible sense of humor, and I think I would not do their story justice unless I was able to show and showcase my parents' sense of humor. You know, years ago, I'm still a practicing podiatrist, as I tell many people when they ask why, I say there's no business like toe business. Okay, people are still awake. But I never thought I would be doing this. My mom was lecturing, and here and there I would go on a lecture. And just to give you a point of reference, July 2nd, 2019, we were on our annual trip to Auschwitz, and we had about 100 people from all over the country with us. And it was late at night, and my mom was still, you know, giving over 200 lectures a year. And I said, "Mom, you know, you're 85 years old. Maybe at some point you need to slow down." She looked at me like I had two heads. She said, "Slow down. How can I slow down, Alex? Unfortunately, there's so much hate and bigotry and anti-Semitism, racism in the world. Unfortunately, my work is needed more than ever." And the one regret I have is I never asked my mom what my role should be. I thought she would kind of live forever. 2 days later, in that hotel room, she died in Poland. And so I always think about that conversation I had is kind of my MO, my reason for doing this. And so with that in mind, a lot of people ask about, the title of the book, and I want to tell one story. And it's a unique title when you think about the Holocaust. So when I was in podiatry school, I was about 26 years old in Chicago. I was diagnosed with cancer. In fact, I tell people I have something in common with Lance Armstrong. No, I didn't win the Tour de France. No, I didn't date Sheryl Crow, and I definitely didn't do PEDs. But we both had the same cancer, the same doctor, Dr. Larry Einhorn at IU, testicular cancer. And it spread to my lung, and I thought I was going to die. And I was feeling sorry for myself in my apartment in Chicago. And my mom kept on calling me. This was the old days with the voicemail, and I would hit delete. One got through, and she said, "Look, I know you're there. You're feeling sorry for yourself. You have to understand, your dad's a survivor. I'm a survivor. You're going to be a survivor. This is your Auschwitz." So I hear these words, and I thought, I need to quit feeling sorry for myself. And I truly believe that my mom's words made it so much easier for me and my dad's encouragement to get through the cancer. And I had chemotherapy, and I lost all my hair, and this is real. It grew back, even though I'm losing it now. And so what I want to do is kind of tell you essentially three stories. One is my father's story, and one of the other reasons I wrote the book, throughout Indiana, really throughout the country, people know about my mom's story, but nobody knew my dad's story. And I think there's some, in fact, just 2 days ago, we found out more information, and my dad's passed away 3 years ago. So my dad's from Riga, Latvia, one of the Baltic states. And as you probably know, the Nazis invade in 1941. My dad had 3 brothers who were a very religious Jewish family. My dad was the youngest of 4. His oldest brother, Zori, in 1937, joins the Latvian Navy. And in 1939, these dates I just found out this week. 1939, he was near Gdansk, Poland, fighting against the Germans. The Germans capture him and kill him, and my dad loses his oldest brother. In 1941, when the Nazis invaded Riga is the capital city, it's a port city. My dad's father was on his way to work. I told you I'm a podiatrist. My dad's father, my grandfather, was a shoe cobbler. So I guess shoes and feet, they run in the family. And so my grandfather was wearing very traditional Jewish garb, and they knew he was Jewish, and restrictions were already in place. Jews were told where to eat, where to stand, where to walk, etc. So he's walking down the street on his way to work, and they said, "No, you need to go to the other side." He kept on walking. They kill him immediately. So now my dad's lost his oldest brother in 1939, his dad. And so it's now my dad, his mother, and 2 other brothers, Leo and Shlomo. They're taken from their home and put in a ghetto. It's not like a ghetto that we hear about here in the United States. It's where they put Jews essentially to decide how and where to kill them. Barbed wire around, minimal shelter, minimal food. My dad could see his apartment from the ghetto, but you could not come and go. And one of the things that I always that my dad told me, was that because they were very religious, it was very important to have Shabbat dinner on Friday night. So one of the last things my grandmother took from the house was a tablecloth. So when they get to the ghetto, there are no tables, there's no silverware, but she put the tablecloth on the ground so that her boys could eat something and have some kind of semblance of being human, even though they were eating off the ground. My dad at this point was 14, Shlomo and Leo were in their early 20s. And at one point, they're going to liquidate the ghetto. What does that mean? They're going to decide who's going to live and who's going to die. Typically, when they would do this, they would put women, elderly, and children on one side of the ghetto, and men and younger men that could work on another side of the ghetto. So Shlomo and Leo go to the side with the men that can work. My dad, even though he was 14, 15, felt he was kind of a mama's boy. He went with his mom on the women's side. My grandmother knew what was going to happen. "Mickey, you go with your brothers. No, if they kill you, my life's not worth living." My grandmother obviously won out. My dad went with his two brothers. On November 30th, 1941, there was a massacre. There's a forest called the Rumble of Forest near the ghetto. There was a massacre there. That's where my grandmother was killed. 2 or 3 days after that initial massacre, my dad went back to the side of the ghetto where his mother was killed, found a baby doll. When Grandma and I were there about a year ago, at the side of the memorial, I put a baby doll at the side of the memorial. So now my dad is with his two brothers, Leo and Shlomo. The camp gets liquidated. They go to a work camp called Kaiserwald. And then shortly thereafter, and this is over 4 years, they end up near Stutthof, which is ironically where their older brother was killed. Somewhere en route between Kaiserwald and Stutthof. Stutthof is near Gdansk, Poland. It's a port city. My uncle Shlomo escaped, and he ended up going to Eretz Israel, the future homeland of Israel. So now for the latter 2 years of the war, my dad is with brother Leo, and they are in a variety of work camps, and they're now in Germany. They take from Stutthof down to Buchenwald. Buchenwald is a big series of camps, and it's April of 45, just to reset the time and the place. And my dad and my uncle Leo could sense that the Nazis were losing the war. He would tell me that, he didn't like the Nazis when they were winning the war. Sure as heck didn't like them when they were losing the war. So they're on a death march. They're being told they're going to be taken to safer ground. And so my dad thinks, well, he's now 19, they're just going to kill us. I've got to make a run for it. We don't know the conversation between my dad and brother Leo, Uncle Leo, but at one point they're going around a ravine, and it's dusk, and my dad sees a little break between two of the Nazis. So he makes a run for it, and he runs, and they shoot after him. When he would lecture years later, my dad everything was sports analogies. And you'll find out why here in a second. But he would lecture to kids, and at the time, the Indianapolis Colts had a running back named Edgerrin James. So he would tell kids he ran from the bullets like Edgerrin James was dodging tacklers. He runs and runs and runs and finds a building and hides in the ruins of the building. The rumor was that the Americans were in the area to liberate. And now for the next 2 hours, there's fierce fighting. And my father now is just hoping that he didn't get killed, shot, or a grenade. So he's hiding in this building because they got lice all over him. Clothes are torn. And then he hears there's about 2 hours of silence. And my father was really good with languages, and all of a sudden, after the silence, he hears a weird language. He knew it wasn't German, it wasn't Latvian, it wasn't Hebrew. He thought, well, maybe it's the Americans or the British. So he comes up with his hands up, 2 American GIs, one of which was Wendell Knox from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. They give my dad a Coca-Cola. True story. My dad always thought for the rest of his life Coca-Cola was his champagne. Mr. Knox said, how's it feel to be free? My dad knew the word free, and he said, good. So the 2 GIs who were part of a battalion led by somebody by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Neff from this place called Terre Haute, Indiana. The 2 GIs were worried that Mr. Neff would think of my father as a liability. So for 2 or 3 days, they hid my dad from the superior officer. And he was still in the lice, clothes, and torn, but he had food, he was eating. And so on the 3rd day, Mr. Neff found out about my father and kind of interrogated him. And the thought was, kind of the knee-jerk response was that my dad would be a liability. This battalion was mainly responsible for building bridges. Mr. Neff was a mechanical engineer. He graduated from Rose Poly, so he was in charge of building bridges, but they were periodically involved in combat. So Mr. Neff is talking to my dad. He knows the terrain. He knows the dialects. Thought he's not going to be a liability. He'll be an asset. So they put him in GI clothes. The day that my dad was given the Coca-Cola was April 15th, 1945. Ironically, my birthday is April 15th. I didn't know this until Graham and I did research on the book. And so for several weeks, my dad was with the battalion. He was picking up English, learning English, and then they get to an area where they're going to be in combat. And Mr. Neff says, Mickey, I've got no choice. I've got to put you in a refugee camp. And my dad looks at Mr. Neff and says, I want to go where you're from, wherever this Terre Haute, Indiana is. And at the time, my dad didn't know where Shlomo was, didn't know where his brothers were. So he's in a refugee camp, and he starts writing letters. My dad loved to write letters. One of the letters somehow ends up on the doorstep of Mrs. Neff in Terre Haute. By now, Mr. Neff is in Great Britain. She telegrams her husband, says, you got to help that little boy. Mr. Neff, this is now May of 45, Mr. Neff then contacts his GIs and says, go find him in the refugee camp. He'll help you out. We got to keep him busy because I got to get him to Terre Haute. So over the next year, from May of 45 to May of 46, my dad hung out with the GIs, learned how to read English by reading the newspaper Stars and Stripes, a military newspaper. I have pictures of him in a Vienna bar with, of course, a Coca-Cola malt. And so everything was Coca-Cola. And then May 11th, 1946, he boards the boat, the SS Marine Flasher, with 700 other Holocaust survivors, ends up coming to New York, takes a train to Terre Haute. So the game plan, or the idea was, and by this time he knew that Leo had survived and was in Connecticut. Shlomo was in Israel, soon to be Israel. And so my dad, everybody is talking about this game called basketball. My dad in Europe played soccer. He didn't know anything about basketball. My dad on a good day was 5'2". You can see where I get my height. And so my dad was supposed to go to 3 years of high school. He tested out of courses, ends up getting out of high school in 1 year. And he was living with a family next door to the Neffs. The Neffs had their own family, 3 kids. And this other family he lived with had a pharmacy. So my dad began working as a pharmacy technician in high school. And so he decides he wants to be a pharmacist. He can't get into Butler or Purdue, so he enrolls at Indiana State Teachers College, which of course is now Indiana State University. And he looks on his class schedule the first semester, he's taking the gym class. And the rumor was that the gym class is being taught by the basketball coach at Indiana State Teachers College. The first day he goes to class, he meets the teacher, a guy by the name of John Wooden. You might know him. So Coach Wooden takes a liking to my dad, didn't know much about his history. My dad had a thick accent. And before classes, my dad would be taught hook shots by Coach Wooden. So halfway through the semester, my dad was very studious, and he had to get an A. Coach Wooden takes my dad aside and said, Mickey, you're studying, you're such a great influence on these kids because he's a little older than them. You're going to get an A. I know you want to go to pharmacy school. You're going to take the class next semester. You're going to get another A. They became very good friends. And at the end of that year, my dad gets into Purdue Pharmacy School. Coach Wooden goes to UCLA, and we all know the rest is history. Coach Wooden wins 10 national titles. When I'm a little boy, I can remember 4 years old, we're watching UCLA basketball, and my dad keeps on saying, there's my gym teacher. A couple years later, we start getting letters every year from Coach Wooden. Dear Mickey, I hope you're doing well. I have a new player. His name is Lou Alcindor. I think he's going to be pretty good. And I have all these letters. So now I'm going to kind of switch gears, and we're going to talk about my mom, and then I'm going to kind of put the whole story together, and then, of course, talk about what Graham mentioned, forgiveness. So my mom and my dad did not know each other at all during the war. My mom is from the Transylvanian Valley, Hungary, Romania. My mom also from a very religious family. The Transylvanian Valley, of course, is supposedly where Count Dracula was from. There were 2 older sisters, Edith and Elise. My grandfather, who I'm named after, Alexander, desperately wanted a boy, especially in the Jewish faith. You want to carry on the name. So now my grandmother is now pregnant for a 3rd time. And, of course, there's no ultrasound. So the midwife comes to deliver, and a baby comes out. It's a girl, Miriam. But then the midwife says, oh, wait, there's another one coming. And with great disappointment in her father's eyes, Eva, my mom, is born. And so my mom always thought that her father blamed her for being a girl. And she would say, Daddy, a couple years later, I'm a girl. I'm sorry, you're mad at me. And when the girls got in trouble, my mom was always the one that was spanked or punished. And some people theorize it made her tougher. So they lived in a village. They were the only Jewish family. They owned a farm, and all the other people worked on my grandfather's farm. And my mom can remember that things were pretty normal. And you have to compare a little bit my dad's story. 1939, 1940, my mom was living a normal life, going to school. If you know history, Hungary, Romania was not supposed to be invaded by the Nazis. Well, that changed like 41, 42. And my mom can distinctly remember her teacher getting replaced by a Nazi sympathetic teacher. And one time, they had a math equation, might have been second grade. If you have 5 Jews and you kill 2 Jews, how many Jews are left? So my mom and my Aunt Miriam went home to their mother and said, "Mommy, why do we have to take this?" And my grandmother said, "Well, we just have to take it. We're Jewish." Around this same time, my grandfather Alexander, just in case things were about to get bad, did go to Palestine, the future homeland, Jewish homeland, with his brother to kind of check things out. He came back very excited. He thought, well, maybe we should consider this now before there's a problem. And my grandmother said, well, how can we travel with these 2 6-year-old twins? No, we'll stay here. They're never going to come to this small village. Well, things changed. In 1943, things got worse, and then sure enough, in February, March of 44, one time their house was surrounded by Nazi youth. In the middle of the night, my grandfather thought, well, we'll make a go for it. The border's close. They get to the edge of their property in the middle of the night, and one of the Nazi youth says, if you take one more step, we'll shoot. Their window of opportunity had resolved. They had no other opportunity, and sure enough, they were put in a ghetto in March of 44, similar to my father. One of their best friends, my mom and my aunt, her father was a pastor in a church. She came to the ghetto and threw food across the barbed wire, so my mom and the other girls had food. So now, March of 44, nobody tells them where they're going. The entire family is put on a cattle car. People call it a train. It wasn't a train, it was a cattle car. There was a window, and if you went to the bathroom, that was in the corner. If you died, you went to the other corner. And so over 3.5 days, the cattle car would periodically stop, and through the little window, and they would get gold watches and get water, little spritz of water. And on the last time this happened, typically the exchange, the language was Hungarian. On the last exchange on that 3rd day, the language was German. They knew they were in trouble. So sure enough, the cattle car starts slowing down prematurely, and they put 2 and 2 together. They figured they were somewhere in Germany, or Nazi Germany. The cattle car doors opened, a mass chaos. My grandfather takes a family and said, if anybody survives this place, they didn't know where they were, you go to Palestine, to Israel. So my mom and my aunt were identical twins, perfectly identical. You could not tell them apart. They step off the cattle car. My mom thinks she's landed on Mars. She's 10 years old. 10 years old. There's nobody this young here, that young here. And all of a sudden, my mom realizes, as she's holding onto her mom's arms, and Miriam's on the other side, her dad disappears in the crowd. The 2 older girls get swallowed up in the crowd. People are yelling, screaming. There's German shepherds, dogs barking. This happened to be at night, so you couldn't see anything. And all of a sudden, a Nazi's running up and down the selection platform. They are at Auschwitz. The Auschwitz selection platform, yelling, twins, twins, Zwillige, Zwillige in German. So my mom and my aunt looked alike. A Nazi approached my grandmother and said, are they twins? Before she said the word yes, 3 Nazis jump out and pull my mom and my aunt away from their mother. The last thing my mom remembers is their mother being dragged away, screaming and crying. If my mom were here today, she would tell you the one regret she has is that she didn't know this would be the last time she would see her mother, and she never had the chance to say goodbye. So now my mom and my aunt go to a barracks to be tattooed. My mom's number is A7063. My aunt's number is A7064. They're then taken to a barracks, all girl twins, ages 3 to 13. And my mom and my aunt were raised to be kosher. So they're given something that resembles bread. And my mom and my aunt tell some of the older twins, well, we're not eating this because we're going to keep kosher, and we're not eating this until we see our parents. So I want to see our parents. One of the older twins says, see the smoke in the distance? That's where your parents are. And my mom said, oh, that's crazy. Who's going to be burning bodies? Oh, well, you'll find out tomorrow. Dr. Mengele, who's in charge of us, you'll meet him. So sure enough, the next morning, all the little girl twins, ages 3 to 13, females, there's a boys' side on the other side of the camp, stand like little toy soldiers. Mengele comes in with his entourage, and Mengele inspects his new victims, of which my mom and my aunt were 2 of them. And this was in May of 44. Just to compare my dad's story, by this time he's in camp for 3.5 years, but you can't compare pain. So now my mom's part of Mengele's experiments. What does that mean? They would use one twin as a control, one as a guinea pig. If one twin died during the experiments, they would kill the other one and do comparative autopsies. A lot of people wonder, even to this day, what was the purpose of the experiments? I've met over 100 Mengele twins over the years. If you talk to any of them, they thought they were being used in experiments to perpetuate the German race, i.e. to develop fertility drugs. There's a book that's been out by David Marlowe 4 or 5 years ago. He seemed to think that it would be more appropriate if you were doing that to test the mothers of twins, but nonetheless, they were being used in these experiments without their consent. This started in May of 44, went through the rest of the summer into the fall. I'm just going to tell 2 anecdotal stories maybe. One day in August of 44, there was no guard in the guard tower in front of my mom's barracks. So she steps out, it's a sunny day, and she looks up and sees a plane circling Auschwitz. She's 10 years old. On the back of the plane, she sees the American flag. Now, when I heard this story, when I was in my 30s, I said, wait a second. There's no internet, there's no TV. How do you know, Mom, there was an American flag? She said, well, Alex, it's very easy. When I was younger in Hungary, we had a cousin and an aunt in Cleveland, Ohio. And every 3 or 4 months, we would get letters from the cousin and aunt in Cleveland, Ohio. And I was always opening up the letters because I was a troublemaker. So I saw the envelope, saw the stamp, the American stamp. She put 2 and 2 together. The reason I tell this story is that my mom would tell you she could no longer think like a 10-year-old. In fact, she would tell you that the last time she was a kid was when she stepped off the selection platform. She now had to think every day like an adult because every day was an opportunity to die and or live. And so she sees a plane. It was a reconnaissance plane circling with a smoke signal so they would not bomb inside Auschwitz. Years later, she met one of the pilots from that plane during one of her talks. The experiments continued into the fall. At one point, my mom was injected with something, and she became very sick. And Mengele looked at her and said, too bad she's so young. She only has 2 weeks to live. She was put in the barracks that is now called the Barracks of the Living Dead. During Holocaust remembrances, you'll see somebody crawling on the ground. That is not my mom, but she was in those barracks. People were more dead than alive, and when they stopped moving, they were thrown on a gurney and taken away. Well, one time, my mom realizes there's water at the end of the barracks, so she's crawling. I must survive. I must survive. She gets some water, and she realized, and this is a 10-year-old, that the way they were evaluating her was checking her temperature with the old thermometer in the armpit. She started feeling a little better, and she would stick the thermometer out the back end, and they're looking at her fever chart. Now it's coming down. So she was in control of her vitals. So after 2 weeks, she was supposed to be dead. She was reunited with my aunt, Dota Miriam. Miriam was in isolation. Years later, my aunt asked my mom, what were they waiting on? Why was I in isolation? My mom said, Miriam, they were waiting for me to die so they could kill you with an injection to the heart. That never happened. And so by November, December of 44, they were seeing less and less of the Nazis. The experiments had pretty much stopped. And then in January of 45, there's 2 main camps to Auschwitz, Auschwitz I and Auschwitz II. They were on a death march from Auschwitz II to Auschwitz I with Nazis. They run into the Auschwitz I, the Nazis disappear. And so they're hiding in a building, and they could hear fighting in the distance. And they too heard and could feel that the Nazis were losing the war. On January 27th, 1945, they were in a barracks. My mom couldn't even look out the window. She was so short. One of the older twins, and it was snowing sideways, they see something moving. It was the Ukrainian army, the Red Army, coming to liberate Auschwitz. All the girls, ages 3 to 13, run out, get candy and cookies and milk, and the Red Army said, well, we'll be back in a couple weeks. They came back a couple weeks later with big motion pictures. My mom, to her dying day, liked attention. If anybody, Brent met her, she liked attention. So there's a video, and my mom realized there was a camera, so she ran to the front of the line. So the famous picture and video with my liberation picture, my mom and my aunt are at the very front of the line, of course. And so they're liberated January 27th, 1945. They end up in an orphanage in Katowice, hoping against hope that their parents survived. They thought, well, they had just had their 11th birthday. They thought, well, if we survived, surely our parents survived. One of the other twins, the Changara twins, their mother came to the orphanage. She knew them and signed them out, said she was related. That allowed my mom and my aunt to eventually get back to their village in the Transylvanian Valley. As they run down the hill, they're thinking, well, surely one of our sisters survived, surely the parents survived. They get to the house. The only thing that survived was a family dog. My mom would tell you that the Nazis killed people, didn't kill dogs. So they moved in with an aunt in a neighboring city, Cluj, a bigger city, and then in 1950, they got a visa to go to Israel. My mom, for 5 years after the war, from 45 to 1950, had terrible nightmares. And so they get to Israel in 1950, and I asked my mom, how was Israel in the 50s? She goes, Alex, this was the best time of my life. She said, well, her nightmares disappeared. I said, why? Well, the farmer was Jewish, the banker was Jewish, the teacher was Jewish. Everybody was Jewish. They lived on a kibbutz, which is like a commune, all Holocaust survivors, boys and girls. She was a teenager. I said, Mom, how was it? She goes, well, it was great. I learned how to say I love you in 10 languages. She dated. So the 56 war breaks out. My mom was a sergeant major in the Israeli army. And shortly thereafterwards, when my mom and my aunt was 27, my aunt marries a Sabra, a native Israeli. My mom felt like an old hag, and so was dating this guy, and it didn't work out. Now we're going to put the stories together. So my father ends up finishing Purdue Pharmacy School, initially moves in with Leo in Hartford, misses desperately his Purdue basketball team, which is where he went to college. Moves back to Terre Haute, but he's single. There's no internet dating in 1959. So my dad goes to visit Shlomo, who's a newspaper executive in Israel. Shlomo puts an ad in the paper. My mom sees the ad. It's a personal ad. They meet on a blind date. My mom spoke no English. My dad spoke no Hebrew. The third date, my dad asks my mom a question. She says yes. He puts a ring on their finger. They're engaged. True story. They had a ceremony in Tel Aviv, and then my dad had to go back to Terre Haute, and my mom was still in the Israeli army. So several months later, my mom ends up coming to Terre Haute, and my mom spoke no English. I was born about a year later. I have a younger sister, 2 years younger. When I was a little kid, my mom spoke to me in Hebrew. My first language is not English, it's Hebrew. One day, and I think I was 1.5 years old, my mom would watch this movie every day on TV. There was kissing and hugging. Anytime she heard a word, she would write it down. Kiss, hug, car. So my dad came home from the pharmacy, and my mom says, I need you to look at these words because I'm trying to learn English. And my dad says, what are you watching? And my mom said, oh, there's a movie every day. It comes on, they're kissing and hugging. And my dad said, oh, this is a stupid soap opera. My mom says, no, there's no soap. It was As the World Turns. And that's how she learned how to speak English. And so, growing up for me in Terre Haute, and I'm going to try to get to the end here shortly, growing up for me in Terre Haute was very unique. I'll just tell you one or two incidents. When I was 5th grade, the custom in Terre Haute during Halloween was to throw corn at the house, and you run to the next house. This happened during Halloween. My mom hears the corn rattle the door and the windows, and she has terrible images of her childhood. These are all my contemporaries, all my 5th grade classmates. So she, the next day, says, well, I'm not going to let this happen because her father, didn't do anything. She's going to do something. So she sits outside the family the tree and starts chasing these kids around the neighborhood. Initially, it was kind of funny, kind of benign. Things escalated. I can remember to this day coming home from a PTA meeting several days later. There's a swastika on our house, go home, dirty Jew. I didn't know what the word dirty Jew meant. I thought, I'm clean. And so this happened 2 years in a row, and then finally every October, my mom got the bright idea to go to Israel. Flights were cheap. She could see relatives, and the fun quickly died out. As time went on, two other things. In 1978, there was a movie called Holocaust. And my mom was not lecturing. She was working as a draftswoman, architect, and then became a real estate agent. And she finds out that there's this movie called Holocaust on NBC. It was a year or two after, some of you may remember, Roots. And so she calls a local NBC affiliate in Terre Haute and says, here, there's a movie. Is this a documentary? Is this a movie? And they said, well, it's actually a movie. Why are you asking? Oh, well, I survived that place. I'm a Mengele twin. You're a what? So she describes her experience and said, well, do you want to come to the studio the last night of the show with your family and you could watch and then go on the set of the news? My mom said, sure. So my sister, my dad, and me watched the movie. The very last scene, if you remember, after liberation, there's a little boy kicking a soccer ball. My dad, I look over at my father, he's crying hysterically. I had never seen my dad cry. I was 17 years old. My mom, and I knew what had happened. He saw himself in the little boy in the movie. And so, with my mom's emotions in check, she gave a great interview. And then I realized at the age of 17, what I needed to do was kind of help my dad come to terms with his past and at the same time encourage my mom to speak. And that's what happened. So let me take you a little bit down the line here for lieu of time. In 1987, I had cancer and I survived. The same year, my aunt was going into kidney failure, my aunt in Israel. And my mom thought, well, she didn't want to go on dialysis. And so my mom flew to Israel. They were identical match. And my mom donated one of her kidneys to my aunt. For a couple years, the transplant went fine. And then in 1991, she started urinary bladder polyps, became cancerous. She had metastases to her lungs. So we brought her to Indianapolis. The same doctor that treated me and Lance Armstrong, Dr. Larry Einhorn, treated my aunt for free. For a year, she responded well. And then on June 6, 1993, she died. And my mom wasn't even given an opportunity to go back to the funeral because my cousins in Israel were very religious. So my mom was heartbroken. And, I think she was depressed. I was practicing podiatry in Evansville, Indiana. I saw Purple Aces shirt. I used to be the team podiatrist for Jim Cruz. Another long story. And so a couple months after my aunt passed away, my mom gets a strange phone call from a Dr. John Mihalchik from Boston College. Eva, we're having a medical ethics conference. I'm sorry to hear about Miriam. Do you want to start lecturing again? And my mom said, oh, sure, I love lecturing to doctors. I like to tell them what to do with all their knowledge. And then he said something strange, and he said, well, Eva, maybe you could bring with you to the meeting one of those Nazi doctors. My mom said, Dr. Mihalchik, where do you think I could find one of those guys? The last time I looked, they were not advertising in the yellow pages, the phone book. And when I talk to younger audiences, they have no idea what I'm talking about. So Dr. Mihalchik said, Eva, that's funny, but maybe you'll think of something. The last project that my mom and my aunt worked on before my aunt passed away was for a German TV network. And when the final documentary came out, there was a Nazi doctor who was cleared of all charges. He was at Auschwitz. His name was Hans Munch. So my mom thinks, well, maybe Dr. Munch will come to Boston. So she contacts the family and explains what the reason is. And the response was, oh, he'll give you an interview, but he's not coming to Boston. You got to go to Germany. My mom was terrified to go to Germany. Even hearing the German language, she would have those nightmares. And so a Dutch TV crew goes with her to Dr. Munch's house. And my mom was already on this path to think of what she could do next. She was always one of these people that, she was knocked down, her sister dies, but she's going to pick herself up and have a new focus. And so she is already thinking, well, surely Dr. Munch knew what Dr. Mengele injected in the twins, so surely I could find out from Dr. Munch how to help the other Mengele twins. So they get to Dr. Munch's house in his living room. My mom asked him the question, so Dr. Munch, what do you know about Dr. Mengele's experiments? I want to help the other surviving twins. And Dr. Munch says, Eva, I don't know anything. He kept everything to himself. I'm sorry you came all this distance for that. But, I have nightmares. My mom said, whoa, you have nightmares? I thought we were the ones with the nightmares. Dr. Munch, why do you have nightmares? Well, besides, he helped save 20-some Jewish doctors. It's another story, but he helped save some 20-some Jewish doctors. He refused to do selections, and that's why he was acquitted at his war crimes trial in 1947. So my mom knew that. And then he said, well, the other thing I had to do is periodically I had to watch the gas chamber. When the last body started moving, I would sign one death certificate. In his living room, he went on to describe in great detail the operation of the gas chamber, the operation of the camp. My mom was always a quick thinker, and she said, Dr. Munch, what you just told me in your living room, you need to tell the whole world. We're going to go to Auschwitz for January 27th, 1995, for the 50th anniversary. Would you come with us to Auschwitz to tell the world what you just told me? With zero hesitation, he said, of course I will. So my mom came back to Terre Haute very excited. I was still in Evansville. And she tells me, well, he doesn't know anything about the Mengele experiments, but he's going to come with us to Auschwitz for the 50th anniversary to document history. I said, Mom, this is not a good idea. The other Mengele twins aren't going to be happy. I don't care what you think. I need to figure out a way. I want to thank him. How do you thank a Nazi doctor? I said, I don't know. So my mom went to the local Hallmark store looking for a thank you card for a Nazi doctor. After 2.5 hours looking for a card, nothing seemed appropriate. She went to the liquor store. My parents didn't drink much. Nothing seemed appropriate. And she would think and think. We didn't have a dishwasher. She would think when she did her dishes. Then one day, several months in advance of January of 95, she thought, I know what I'm going to do. In my name only, the highest honor I could give another person, the best way to thank him is I can forgive him in my name only for being a Nazi. This is the highest honor, the best way I can thank Dr. Munch for documenting history. Of course, when I heard this, I said, bad idea. She went to her local English professor and said, Dr. Kaufman, I've prepared this document. Her fifth language was English, so a lot of times she would have a lot of grammatical mistakes. Dr. Kaufman, can you read this document to make sure that there's no mistakes? Dr. Kaufman reads it and says, Eva, there's no mistakes, but I think you're forgiving the wrong guy. No, I want to forgive Dr. Munch because I'm going to thank him. Well, you need to think about it. You might want to forgive Dr. Mengele. No, I want to forgive Dr. Munch. So January 27th, 1995, at the ruins of the gas chamber, I was there, my sister was there, Dr. Munch's son and daughter and granddaughter were there, several of the Mengele twins were there, and Dr. Munch knew nothing, and this is commonly misportrayed in the media. He knew nothing about my mom's thank you. He knew nothing. So he said his piece. He did show remorse, but he told the world what he had told my mom in his living room. And then my mom said, well, I'm going to thank you, and the way I'm going to thank you in my name only, I emphasize that, is that I will forgive you. And so I remember distinctly a reporter from Bulgaria standing there said, Eva, okay, you're forgiving Dr. Munch. What about Dr. Mengele? No, I just want to forgive Dr. Munch. Over the next several months, by the summer of 95, my mom realized that she didn't have this chip on her shoulder. She didn't hate German people. And so, she, by the summer of 95, started talking about, well, maybe I need to extend this forgiveness to other people. She really resented her parents. They didn't protect her, like I told you. So she wanted to forgive her mom, forgive her dad, forgive herself for hating her parents, forgive Dr. Mengele, and then forgive all Nazis in her name only. And that part's always controversial. And why did she say that? She thought in her mind, in 3 or 4 years, 5 years, I don't want another Nazi doctor saying, well, I worked with Mengele and Munch. I want you to forgive me too. She wanted a clean slate. She wanted to move forward. She didn't want to move back. That part's criticized. I get it. So from that point on, my mom, spoke throughout the world about forgiveness, and I truly believe that gave her another 24 years of life. I think I'll stop here, and we open up. Is that okay for questions, Brent? And Graham will answer questions. First of all, thank you so much. I know this was a little long. I know there's a big Pacer game. I'm the biggest Pacer fan. I used to be a ball boy for the Pacers. That's how I got into medicine. But thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And if you don't ask any questions, I'll probably start telling you jokes, and then Graham says my jokes aren't so good, so maybe you should ask questions. Yes? Probably my mom. Yes, and she probably signed it. Can you look? I bet it's signed Forgive and Heal. I believe. I'll be glad to. I'll be glad to. Yeah, I know she was here at least a couple times. Okay, that was the other one she used. Oh, thank you. Any other comments, questions? Yes. So in preparation for that speech, she said, "Well, isn't Butler the Bulldogs?" I said, "Mom, they're the Bulldogs." So her boss, when she was in real estate, always said, "You're the Bulldog." So if you remember the speech, and you can watch it, as Graham said, that she always thought of herself as a bulldog, because she always, she wanted sales. She would go. I can remember weekends. I mean, if anybody's a realtor, you have no set hours. You're always working. So, but it worked for her. So. Any other? Oh, good. I can tell jokes. Let me tell a couple things that I think will give you some levity. So my mom had this incredible sense of humor. In 1995, with Dr. Mooch on the bus, we're approaching January 27th, the 50th anniversary. Anytime there's a big anniversary, and we just had one in January 80th, so this was 30 years ago, the security is unbelievable. So we get to the gate. They won't let us in. We have a whole itinerary plan. So my mom gets off the bus, and I kind of trail behind her. I knew what was going to happen. They said, "Ma'am, you need a permit to be able to tour."